Today we're joined by the brilliant and super smart Sarah Schlobohm, Chief AI Officer at Zally, a startup redefining human-computer interaction with behavioural AI. In this episode, Sarah shares her insights on understanding business value, the transformative power of AI across all industries, and the importance of ethical, responsible AI development.
Do you want it to be descriptive or prescriptive? Do you want to say how it is, or do you want to say how it should be? And that's, I think, a question that we have to ask about AI as well. It will mirror back whatever we give it, and if we give it a biased society, it will give us biased answers back.
She also highlights the value of human-machine collaboration and staying curious about emerging technologies.
If you blink for a minute, something else has happened, especially in this sort of AI arms race that's happening at the moment. Stay curious, keep reading, keep looking at all the information that comes out. It's a really interesting time to live in.
Get ready for a fascinating glimpse into Sarah's world and the limitless possibilities in AI. Enjoy! Sarah, let's talk data. So firstly, congratulations on your new appointment of role Chief AI Officer at Zally. That is very cool. And chairperson now? Chairperson?
No, I'm on the board.
You're on the board?
Yes, which is an exciting move, and I think a big signal from Zally about how important AI is to the business.
Absolutely. So during your interview, were the conversations about being a board member, or has that surprised you more recently?
I think I could see the potential for it, but I don't think that was specifically discussed. No,
Yeah.
I was pretty excited about just having a C-level role to begin with.
Absolutely. And there's not many sole AI officer roles out there in C-suites. I think there's less than 30, actually, after checking out and out. You know, there's analytics in AI, data in AI, but solely AI is pretty cool. And it's kind of like the epitome, isn't it? That's where people want to get to in data and analytics. Was that always part of the plan for you?
I think I definitely had the ambition to get to the C-level eventually. I think certainly it's a relatively new role, so I wasn't aiming for Chief AI Officer because that just didn't exist when I was thinking about it many, many years ago. But I think, you know, just like we saw the rise of the Chief Data Officer, and that's been really a popular thing, I think you're going to see more and more Chief AI Officers where that's important to the business, where AI is a core part of the product, when it's a core part of, you know, who the business is fundamentally. It's important to represent that at the highest levels.
And like you said, a testament really to the importance of that at a senior level within the business. Because Zally, would you position them as a startup or scale up?
Yes. We're a startup based in Manchester. Really exciting, really vibrant. We're based in Dish, the digital security hub. Which puts us around lots of other vibrant startups as well, it's a great place to be.
I love the word you use, vibrant, because looking from an outside perspective, certainly the pink, the branding, the culture, what you're about, the energy, I really get that good vibe. And you're obviously wearing pink today, representing.
You can't miss it.
Is that what drew you to the business?
I mean, a little bit. I do appreciate that it's a really strong brand and it really tries to stand out and do something different. And if you can represent that visually, and I'm really interested in the visual display of information in my day job, branding is another really important way to do it.
Yeah, amazing. So in terms of your path, and you started out as a scientist.
I did.
Maybe more so in the pure sense of science, not in terms of data science. So your PhD was experimental particle physics?
Yes.
I got that right?
That's right.
The name itself is a little hard. So tell us about that, and then your transition more into data science.
Sure. So if you've seen The Big Bang Theory, I'm not Amy Farrah Fowler, but I do work in kind of the same area originally. I looked for a particle called the Higgs boson, which tells us how particles get mass. So particle physics is about understanding the very tiniest stuff that makes up all of the matters and forces and interaction in the universe. And to do that, we build these gigantic machines that collide the highest energy particles together and then try and reconstruct the information that came back out of that. So I didn't realize that I was using AI at the time. I thought I was just doing physics and like, this is just another tool. Like, here's your calculator, here's your notebook, here's your neural network, you know, that you have to build. But I got such amazing skills out of that, such exposure to what was at the time cutting edge techniques, what was at the time insane amounts of data. It was just such a great foundation. And then once I decided to move into business, turns out business wants those skills as well.
Yeah.
You can point that at any kind of data.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose for you, you mentioned Big Bang Theory. Is that something that you looked at growing up? Because the power of role models, often, women don't always have role models of the gender. Not that you need to be the same gender to have a role model, but TV shows like that actually have quite a high power. I know those who grew up with X-Files were more likely to become a scientist, given their protagonist was a female.
Yeah, I'm the X-Files generation.
Oh, yeah.
I definitely looked up to Dana Scully. Yeah. When I got my first flip phone, I had a Motorola Razr. I was absolutely convinced I was Dana Scully. Yeah.
They are amazing. We should bring back flip phones.
Yeah, they were good. Answering with that.
You feel cool,
good.
Don't you? Yeah.
Really cool.
There might be a movement back to that. I mean, I don't know. I think there's a lot at the moment, isn't there, about how smartphones are distracting and can be dangerous in ways. But when you could just send a text and you had to really be careful not to go over a certain amount because you didn't want to, was it 10p or 20p? I can't remember what the charges were. But yeah, the world has evolved so much. And like you said, the world of analytics, data, AI is ever evolving. How do you keep up with the latest trends?
It's so hard. If you blink for a minute, something else has happened, especially in this sort of AI arms race that's happening at the moment. I think just stay curious, keep reading, keep looking at all the information that comes out. I mean, my LinkedIn feed is just AI article after AI article these days. It's a really interesting time to live in.
Of course, yeah. And it is incredible, as we know, but there is a lot of hype and maybe misinformation. And people, a little bit scared of the unknown, perhaps, maybe because of media or just because they just don't understand simply. So how would you say you can separate the hype from the reality?
It's a good question. There is a lot of hype, and I think anytime anybody says this is going to solve all your problems and it's going to take you no effort, just pay me a bunch of money to do that. Those kind of scammers have existed long before AI did. I think right now where we're seeing really big improvements in how AI can help you is if you've got a really repetitive task that doesn't take an awful lot of brain power to do, if you're just kind of on autopilot as you're doing it, that's potentially a really good place to think about automating. So if it solves a really boring problem for you, that's probably the most realistic. And some of the hype is overhyped.
Yeah. And then in terms of industries, I mean, it's touching most industries at the moment. Which one are you particularly excited about that it's going to disrupt?
I don't think there's going to be much it doesn't touch. I think there's just so much potential. Hopefully in a good way, right? Hopefully we can start to see what will happen beyond the basics of AI. Because sort of going back to the mobile phone example, when we first got mobile phones, we used them as mobile phones, right? We just took phone calls, but in a different place. But then we started texting, and then we got smartphones. And when was the last time you actually took a phone call? Now I'm horrified if somebody calls me without texting me first. Who are you? What do you want? So I think we haven't quite hit that yet. I think we're still doing what we used to do slightly better. And there's going to be a whole new wave of the new stuff we're going to figure out that we can do AI first.
Yeah, absolutely. And then with the leadership that you work with, not just at Zally, but previous, I imagine a lot of those have been non-technical. How do you try and get across the real benefits of AI without oversimplifying and missing those nuances?
It's tricky. And I guess going back to my sort of particle physics training, we spent an awful lot of time doing outreach and doing public outreach. So we spent a lot of time learning how to take these really complex scientific techniques and explain them in normal terms while still being accurate. So that's a skill I've been working on for decades now. It's still really hard. It's still a really important skill to do because you can't oversimplify to the point of being untrue. But you also can't expect every single person to understand all of the technical details either. yeah, it's a balance.
Do you think that skill's going to become more and more important? Because we're talking a lot about storytelling, and data strategy as a whole. There's a lot of talk of when data fails, and is that a communication piece? Have you not got the point across of the value that it can add? Storytelling, not just for leaders, but I think for those in junior, mid, senior level positions are extremely important. Do you think that skill is going to become more important?
Yeah, absolutely. I think telling the story of your data, and the data is becoming more important because it's feeding these more powerful models, but understanding, what you can do, again, without overselling it.
Yeah. And how did you hone that skill then?
I've always just loved stories.
Yeah.
What's that Einstein quote? If you want your children to become smart, tell them fairy stories. If you want them to become geniuses, tell them more. Something, I butchered that quote, but that's the point of it. And yeah, I've always loved stories. My mother's an English teacher, so understanding the structure of a story, understanding why people are interested in something, ultimately comes down to empathy. Why does the listener care? Why are they interested in the story? What does it mean for them? So what? I think that's true no matter what kind of story you're telling, whether that's telling a story about a fictional character, or whether that's telling a story about what your data did, or whether that's telling a story about what your model could do in the future. It's that same fundamental, here's the journey we need to go on, here's why you should care about it.
And do you think that's a skill? Have you seen more data scientists and engineers, I imagine, that you've had in your team? Have you seen the skills get better over time?
I think skills don't get better unless you practice them. And I think a lot of times people don't think about that skill explicitly. And so it is important to talk about it and say why this is meaningful and why this is important. I have seen where businesses do care about it. They see their teams develop and they see their teams be able to communicate better. But like any skill, you just have to practice. But we, at Zally, we're even doing a book club at the moment.
Amazing.
So we're reading The Phoenix Project, which is, it's a story about IT, actually, from a good 15 years ago. But it's still relevant to what we're doing. And it still uses an actual narrative. It's a fictional novel. But it still uses that story to explain how things go wrong and what that means for people and how you can make things get better.
Amazing. Whose idea was a book club?
Well, not to toot my own horn, but it was mine. But it's a really important book to think about, both just to read it and to sort of understand its importance in the history of how we work the way we do in tech teams.
Yeah, brilliant. And that's the thing, it's thinking outside of the box, isn't it? Because you can hone skills outside of the day-to-day without realizing that you're doing it. So,
and in a really safe way, right?
Yeah.
So it's our team. We're all supportive. If you say something in a slightly silly manner, then that's all fine. But then that's giving you the skills to be able to go on to the next stage, or go on to a podcast, or go speak to clients, investors. It's all practice.
In your career, because you mentioned a safe environment, and that is key, and we talk on the podcast a lot about psychological safety and the importance of that for collaboration, for confidence, and inclusivity. Have you had any environments where you didn't feel like it was a psychologically safe environment, without naming names?
Well, I wouldn't risk naming names, certainly. Yeah, absolutely. And the difference between a team where you do feel comfortable to be yourself and to, bring your authentic self to work and be who you are. That doesn't mean you should never have a disagreement and you should never challenge, right? It means that you feel safe to be able to do that. And so that when someone says, hey, I think you're wrong about this, they mean it in a good way because they're trying to, solve the problem with you, rather than having a problem with you.
And going back to your early career, were there any particular fears you had or challenges that really, like we say, we all learn from failures, but at the time it feels a little bit sore. But on reflection, is there anything you think that was a really pinnacle point in my career?
I've had a bit of a twisty career. I've possibly changed lots of different points, and all of them have been really important in some way. Every role you're in, even if it isn't the best role for you, well, at least you can learn something from it.
Yeah.
And then hopefully it leads to someplace that feels like home. when you get there.
And when you say twisty, were they intentional twists?
No. No, I would have never in a million years thought I was going to be a chief AI officer. When I started my PhD, I thought I was going to be a professor. I think that's probably what most people think when they go on to do a PhD, or they certainly think it's an option. But turns out there's jobs in academia for about 10% of the people who want them. And it turns out business is more than happy to hire them. So, I did quite a big pivot, and I did quite a big change all at once, that I moved from the US to the UK at the same time, and I came over here for a graduate scheme, and I joined PwC, and I was not really prepared for what I was getting into. I wasn't prepared for the really sort of competitive environment. I wasn't prepared for how different it was from academia. Learned a lot. Probably annoyed a few people along the way. Sorry, everyone I used to work with in PwC.
So was that opportunity then, so that was part of your degree back in America?
No, I just decided I hadn't studied abroad or ever really lived more than 2 hours from home. So I thought, well, I'll give it a go. And certainly at the time, there weren't the sort of structured graduate schemes available in the US that the UK actually really thrives at. And so that really clear transition of, I've never taken a business class the entire time I've been at university. Okay, if I'm going to pivot that much, it makes sense to have some of that structured support.
And let's go abroad whilst we're doing it. So did you say bye to your family like for a year and just never go back?
Well, I still see them. But yeah, so I thought I'd come for the, sort of 3-year commitment
3 years,
and see how it was going to be. And then, of course, when you're in that role, you think, okay, gosh, well, I'm going to get to manager, and then maybe I'll get to partner. And then I did not do that. Then I pivoted again. I went into sort of more financial services at that point, because I was really interested in the data assurance point of view, and financial services had the best data at the time, the most that you could work with. But even then, I pivoted from the sort of credit risk space into financial crime compliance. From there, I moved to working for a hire, train, deploy consultancy. And then I moved back to a different compliance place, and now I'm at Zally. So the only common thread really is data.
Yeah, of course. And how does working at a startup compare to the likes of PwC, which is absolutely huge?
Very different, very different. It's fast-paced, sort of less process, less rules and regulations. But sometimes even within a larger organization, you can get a sort of startup style space,
course,
like a greenfield space.
Yeah.
And I've always been really drawn to those and really interested in those. Mm-hmm. So I thought when I left HSBC, going to a private equity backed would give me the sort of, more agile, faster paced thing I was looking for. Turns out I wanted even more than that, and I'm loving the startup world.
Yeah, amazing. And I suppose some companies, not all, but I know there's challenges with AI, like getting stuck overthinking in terms of the research that you don't get to production, or it's a slow journey to production. Why do you think that is, and how would you advise just to push forward?
Yeah, it's a huge problem. It's a huge problem everywhere, not just startups. People think the model is the thing, but the model is the beginning. You have to think from the very beginning about production in mind. And so one of the reasons why we're reading the Phoenix Project is because that's the area that sort of developed the concept of DevOps in IT, that you don't separate development and production from a purely software point of view. But the extension to that for AI and machine learning is a thing called MLOps, and it's thinking about the production ready system from the moment you think about your first model. So that was one of the first things that I really wanted to make sure we got in place really well in Zally. And I'm really happy that we're doing that, because you can just work so much faster, and you can just be ready to go and just see those changes push all the way through in the same way that you would have had to worry about that in IT in the past.
Yeah, and embracing the grey a lot, because the outcomes are not always binary, are they?
No, and and good is better than perfect.
Yeah, and I suppose those from a mathematical background that perhaps used to getting, and I mean, obviously it's logical, 2 + 2 is 4, we all know that. So those, do you think there's a shift where it's difficult to go from that logical way of thinking to embracing the grey?
It can be. Physics has always been quite ambiguous.
Yes.
And one of the biggest things, one of the biggest revolutions that happened in particle physics in the 20th century was quantum mechanics. And so that's all about thinking about things probabilistically, and everything is both a particle and a wave. Yeah. And you have to accept that duality at all times. And so I think maybe I was well set up to be happy in the slightly more ambiguous probabilistic world because of that physics background, rather than something that is more always concrete.
I think so. So ROI is a big topic in data strategy, AI. How can you measure that really? Like, what success? You're spending all this money on AI strategy. How can you measure what you're getting from it? Because everyone loves ROI in business.
Everybody loves ROI in business. Yeah, it depends on what you're doing. Some things, and I think some of the areas where you really embrace the areas that have embraced data science and machine learning first are the areas where it has been easy to demonstrate the value. So I think if you sort of walk into a business, you expect to see models in certain places, right? You expect them to see in sort of forecasting, customer churn, customer segmentation, that kind of stuff. And not coincidentally, those are the areas it's easiest to prove, well, I put in this model and now I reduced churn by 1%. So I think we probably should take more of a lesson from that in other parts of the business. I think the other thing that comes up, which is often hard to prove, is that a lot of the times when you're building these models, you do them to avoid a bad outcome. So I've certainly spent a lot of my career in risk and compliance, and that it's tricky to prove that you avoided something bad that was happening. Yeah. But if you think about the impact of that, so if you had done something silly with GDPR, you could be talking about 4% of your company's revenue, and that's a big number. So that's one of the ways to focus on. But I think thinking from the mindset when you're building a model, okay, how are you going to prove this? How are you going to measure the difference? Are you thinking about doing things like A/B testing? So test one version, test another, see which one does better under the same conditions. Things like if you have a model that's trying to sort customers in a certain order, you can keep a small amount separate that you still assign randomly, and then you can compare the rest of your model to those that went in completely randomly. And if you see a difference, well, hopefully you're better than random.
Yeah.
So you can think about these things in advance. Sometimes, I guess the way to think about it is sort of the non-functional requirements as well. So the ROI is important in terms of what you can measure for the business, but there's also all those boxes that you have to tick. Certainly with the AI hype wave, just having some AI is important sometimes.
Yeah.
But it is important to make sure that you're demonstrating that you're aware of what's happening in the world, and that you're not going to get swept over by this wave. You're not going to ignore the internet or the smartphone, because that's where we are in terms of these big shifts and revolutions.
Yeah, you are right in terms of avoiding something bad. And I think IT is a good example of that, because no one ever is like, oh, everything's working today, that's great.
Yeah.
But as soon as something goes wrong, you're like, IT, this isn't working. We all know when, like Wi-Fi, for example, when it's working, we're great, we don't even think about it. It's ubiquitous, it's in the background. And I think IT have always had a hard time with that, especially from the front line in support.
Yeah.
Because people are very quick to complain. But it's like, what about all the times it is working?
Yeah, if I'm doing my job well, you shouldn't notice me at all.
Yeah, exactly. So it's an interesting way of thinking. And I know we've spoken before, in a lot of companies, those outside of data that maybe don't understand the importance of like data quality, data governance, to that they're like, not interesting, we just want AI.
Yeah.
How important is data quality in an effective AI strategy?
Oh, it's so important. Yeah, I mean, look, there's the stick, right, which is of course GDPR, and UK GDPR will still get you if you do it wrong. But the saying of garbage in, garbage out for every software program is especially true when you're talking about machine learning and AI. because anything that's in that data, you're learning from that data. The machine is going back and looking at past data, learning from it, projecting that into the future. So if you've got anything wrong in the data, if you have, well, things that are just literally wrong, if you've got biases that shouldn't be there, you can amplify and project that going forward, and you can make a small problem worse by throwing a more powerful tool at it. So it's no surprise that when we're talking about these large AI models, everybody's talking about the data they're training on, how they get access to it, who has the rights to it. I've never heard as many people across the business talking about data as now.
Yes.
I think that's the interesting thing. It used to be confined to an analytics department, or maybe IT if you're lucky. If you're lucky, you might get a chief data officer. Right now, absolutely every person on the board is talking about data, AI, and that's one of the biggest shifts I've seen.
Huge shift. I suppose ChatGPT, was it November 22, 23?
Yep.
And then overnight, it was just everyone's talking about it.
Everybody.
Like literally everybody. I suppose, interestingly, has your family, friends outside of the space, are they now like, you're super cool? Maybe they always thought you were cool, but now they like,
I've never been
cool. Talk to me about data and AI.
I mean, I think the thing that's cool is they're all using ChatGPT.
Yeah.
Like everybody I know is using it, and you can show them examples of it, and it's fun and it's easy to use, and you can plan a holiday and write a silly song and all of these things. Previously, nobody talked to me about my career. My friends and family did not care about the latest churn model that I was building, but suddenly everybody's really interested in generative AI for good reason. Again, that it's not just everybody in the company, it's everybody.
Yeah, it really is. And like you said, garbage in, garbage out. When it comes to ChatGPT, for example, like the phrase, maybe this is going to become a mainstream phrase, is like Google it. Google it. Google has all the answers. There is misinformation out there. ChatGPT, would you check facts on there? Would you then sense check those facts again?
Absolutely. So one of the things about generative AI is that it can hallucinate, right? Which is that it will be very confidently wrong about something.
Okay.
And I guess we're used to thinking of computer programs as being like, I will give you the accurate answer. And so we're somewhat not used to this. But it's almost more like comparing it to a human. And we've all sat next to that person at dinner that is just really confidently wrong about something. and you just don't have any way of checking that unless you check another source. So by all means, if you're looking for something, you can ask it for links. So you can ask it for sources. Again, those sources may be things on the internet, which are still written by humans, which could still be subject to error. So it's worth checking. But you're just going all the way down in the cycle. You have to check that the sources, do you trust the sources that the sources have?
Yes.
And all of that.
Yeah.
So.
And the adoption is interesting because you're right. A lot of people are using it. But some use it very differently to others, as you can expect. And so, prompting is an art in itself. There's tutorials, there's YouTube videos, there's everything on that. How important is that to be able to prompt Gen AI in the right way?
It's so one study I read said it can make up to 40% difference in the quality of the answer.
Really?
Based on how you prompt. Yeah. But I think the thing that occurs to me is that prompting is ultimately asking good questions.
Yes.
Which has always been the hardest part, but always the most important part as well. But give it context. Say, why are you doing this? Say, give it a role. Say, this is your job. This is what I expect you to do. This is exactly what I want to see out. This is the format. Give it an example of what good looks like. All of this would be really good practice if you were explaining something new to a brand new junior person on your team, or if you were asking, if a brand new person joined your team and you were asking them to do a specific piece of work for you, giving them all of these bits of information, you're going to get a better result out of that.
Of course.
And so it's not surprising that that's all true when we point that at the AI as well.
Yeah, the lazy way of doing it. If you just ask a bad question, you're going to get a bad response, aren't you? It's like the quality of data. If it's bad data, you're not going to get a good response. And what about ethical AI then? Because that is quite a hot topic at the moment, and also biases within AI.
Yeah, I mean, there are so many different lenses to talk about AI ethics on. Bias is a big one. because we feed it all of this information, but we feed it information from a biased society. And it's going to reflect that. But the example I go back to is thinking about the comparison to linguistics. And so you say, when you're describing like a grammar of something, do you want it to be descriptive or prescriptive? Do you want to say how it is, or do you want to say how it should be? And that's, I think, a question that we have to ask about AI as well. It will mirror back whatever we give it. And if we give it a biased society, it will give us biased answers back. I'm probably not what it expects a chief AI officer to look like. But so all of that can be amplified, but that can be controlled for as well. But then again, going back to the linguistics comparison, we're then thinking about translation, right? We're thinking about not just a pure word for word, but how do you change that meaning?
And is there anything that worries you about AI?
Oh, plenty of things. Yeah. Mainly, is it working? Can I get it working? Will I get it done on time? That's just the day-to-day job. But yeah, I mean, it's a powerful tool. And like any powerful tool, that means there's a potential for misuse.
Yeah.
Right. Even a car, right? Most of us wouldn't give up our cars. They're so important to our daily lives. But in the wrong situation, they're very dangerous. So I think if we keep that sort of mindset of this is a powerful tool, it can go wrong if you use it badly. It's an important thing to keep in mind.
Yeah, and I always think with data scientists, well, those with background in AI, are you always thinking like what's possible? Like maybe, I don't even know, you're in a waiting room or you're dealing with whatever and you're thinking, if you just automated that, it'd be so much better. Is that how your brain works?
Sometimes. Yeah, I was actually just out for I think it was out for a coffee and thinking about like, oh goodness, this business process is just poorly designed. They're making things one at one, and they should be making these things. Yeah, but I think it's really important to think about how can things be better, and that's fair enough recognizing a problem and don't stop at complaining about it. Like, don't just grumble, "Ooh, it took so long to do this," whatever. Think about how to make it better and how to make the world better.
Do you think the ideal is human and machine? Because there are some businesses out there that are fully automated, which are pretty cool in a way, but also we don't want to go that way as a society, and like you said, there's risks with that as well. Do you think the ideal combination is the human and the machine?
Yes, and it always has been. I mean, it's just, what do we think of as a machine? Back in the Stone Age, stone tools were pretty cool. And then that led to like agriculture. So we just keep advancing, and sometimes we see big shifts, like we see suddenly in AI, but then they just become so ingrained as part of us that we don't even think of it as a separate thing anymore. Like, we don't think about writing as the amazing revolution that it was, but people complained about writing at the time. They're like, oh, if people write stuff down, they'll never remember stuff and they'll get lazy. We don't think about printing anymore, but the printing press was such an important revolution for society. And so it's cool to be watching one.
Yeah, that's a really good example, actually, because I don't think people do make that synergy. They're like, yeah, a machine is like this scary thing that's going to take my job currently, but like we've always had it in some capacity. And then what about the future? I mean, that is a big question.
It's a big question.
Like you said, it's ever evolving. You didn't even know years ago that there was going to be a chief AI officer for you to take.
No, that sounds like Star Trek.
So what excites you, I suppose, and how do you think the future is going to look at, say, in the next 3 to 5 years, if you could predict that far in advance?
I don't think I can. I mean, there's some scary things certainly looming, without getting political, but I think we're going to continue to see these advances. They're not really slowing down. We're seeing some really cool stuff. I think we're going to see a bit of a shift in the types of models that are coming out. But I think we're probably not putting the genie back in the bottle at any point. And I think we're going to start to see that, how will people use AI for creative things? and not see it as a thing that threatens creativity, but a thing that can be used to empower it and advance it.
Yeah. There are many businesses, as we know, adopting AI, but also there are those that are sceptical. And humans often don't like change. Not all humans, but some humans have been known not to like change, especially at the rate it's evolving.
It is an incredible rate.
How do you think those businesses, are they going to survive over the next few years if they're not utilising AI?
I don't see how. I
Really?
mean, can you imagine, like, I'm sure there are some businesses that aren't using the internet, right? There might be some market stalls that aren't. But I think, like, I'm pretty sure even most of the market stalls I go to have a Facebook page, right? So I think eventually it's going to be one of these things where just as you couldn't imagine a reputable large business that doesn't have a huge internet presence, you're not going to find businesses that aren't making the best use of AI that they can.
Yeah. And I love to talk about AI for good, and there is AI for bad, as we all know. Certain industries, but political, there's always going to be bad. And unfortunately, like, criminals innovate at a quick rate and the law can't always keep up.
Yeah.
But we'll keep to the positive side. What excites you about the possibility? AI can save lives, it generally can.
Yeah, it can.
For the environment, there's a great impact. We're working with a startup at the moment, and they're using space technology to identify if crops are going to have disease, way before the human eye can. So that's incredible for agriculture, which is it's a trade that's struggling at the moment, farming. And those kind of initiatives really, really excite me, as I'm sure they do you. So what excites you that is happening or you think can happen with AI for good?
Yeah, there's some really great stuff out there. Medical, obviously. There's been some studies that have shown that a doctor plus AI is the best combination. So it can spot things in, for example, mammograms that doctors might miss, but rather than having two doctors review everything, one doctor plus one AI gives you productivity plus genuinely a better outcome, which is really exciting. I'm really interested in, for example, things like archaeology. And so seeing AI be able to do things like decode texts that we couldn't have seen before, and being able to reconstruct things that we might not have imagined before, things that we just didn't think were possible, new ways of discovering patterns anywhere, genes and proteins and all sorts of things. I guess that's still from a medical point of view, but I think there's just so many things we hadn't, like, that's not what we built it for, but people are going to figure out how to use it for that, and that's super exciting.
How much of your time outside of your day job do you research? Because it sounds like you're an avid reader.
I am.
Yeah. And is that fiction, non-fiction?
It's anything I can get my hands on.
Yeah.
I have a library in my house. It is absolutely overflowing. How do you define research, right? I don't, for the most part, sit down and read books about AI, but I often sit down and think about, well, how does this relate to what I'm experiencing now? And so I was actually just thinking about this. I just bought a bunch of books at the Taschen sale, and I was just looking through, like, my, it's a facsimile of the Luther Bible, which had a huge impact on literacy in the world. And think about that, and think about that printing press comparison. And suddenly everybody has books, right? And so now everybody has AI. Or thinking about photography. So I bought a book on photography just because I love art. But think about how the camera was such a revolution, such a technological revolution, and people were worried about, well, you're going to put the portrait painters out of business. Well, yeah. But also you're creating Man Ray and Ansel Adams and all the great photographers that we've seen since then. So I wouldn't say I do some just pure research, like, here are the books I need to get better at my day job. But there's so much out there that just enriches everything that we think about by adding all these possible connections to it.
Yeah, absolutely. You do learn. And also it's escapism, isn't it? There's nothing like getting lost in a book.
I do get lost in a book.
Books are interesting, though, because some might say they shouldn't still be here, because they don't need to be. Like the Kindle, people have adopted it, some use it. Personally, I don't like it. I like a physical book. Why do you think the book has stood the test of time? And hopefully in years to come, people will still be reading and they won't have Kindles or iPads. Well, I'm sure they will exist, but the book is strong in that sense.
I'm definitely
I'm
definitely pro both. Because here's the thing about the Kindle. When I'm packing, I only have to take one Kindle. Because when I was a kid and I had to pack before the Kindle, like I had to give like half my suitcase to books because that's how much of a bookworm I am. So like I have one book, but under the right circumstances, it's literally every book. And that's quite cool. Why wouldn't I love that? But I also think there is something really beautiful and tactile about a physical book and holding it and feeling the weight of it. And I think certainly a pattern that I've found in book buying now is that when I buy a book, I want to buy a beautiful book. I want something that looks good on my coffee table, that feels good to hold, that's richly illustrated, that gives me an experience while reading it, not just giving me blank words on a page.
I'm the same. And
So
it's a beautiful gift.
It's beautiful, yeah. And, you can have it signed by the author. You can't have a Kindle signed by an author.
Yeah, so we should judge a book by its cover.
I think there are some great book covers out there.
Another thing, I think vinyl players, they've gone up like 60%, the sales in the past year or something crazy. I personally, I love records, I love vinyls. It's a real hobby of mine. But again, maybe shouldn't have stood the test of time the way it has. So it's interesting. We get on board with, the digital era, but we also like things that have been around for a while.
But we don't have to choose. That's the great part.
Yeah,
we
that's
can
true.
have both.
Yeah. I think, and that's going back to the binary thing, I think life sometimes, without being political, but it's, are you left or are you right? Are they wrong or right? Good or bad? Do you like them? Do you not like them? It's like, I'm in the middle. And why do you think society does that? Because I think it does force us to make a definitive decision.
It can be easier. It's a simpler way of addressing the world. But I also find it quite boring if you just have to choose.
Yeah.
Like, think about food. What if you could only eat one food for the rest of your life? That would be really boring. So why do we have to make so many other decisions?
Because people will say, won't they, in conversation, do you like sweet or savoury? I like both.
Yes.
Yeah, both of them. I'll take both. Tea or coffee? Both.
Yes.
But I think that's just human nature. It's the way we question, and maybe going back to the art of good questioning is important. And just on leadership, I suppose, because I think leadership can be lonely. I also think data leadership can be lonely because a lot of people in these amazing positions, there was no predecessor, I imagine, in your current position. And that can be exciting, but it can be quite scary as well because there's no handover. It's like you're carving a path, which is amazing. It's very greenfield, but I think it's daunting. So how have you navigated the paths that you've taken?
Well, to some extent, you can't get it wrong.
Yeah, true. There's no comparison. They did it better.
which is nice. I think it's really interesting. I think the thing that I do in a lot of areas is try and look at what's the closest thing that I can look at, which is, I think, why I've referenced Chief Data Officer. I think that's the nearest path because it's very technical, very focused on data, but a few years back was really a trailblazing role. So learning from that as much as possible. There's a lot of stuff that's still technical that you still want to talk to the technical folks about. There's a lot of folks in leadership positions that aren't technical that you can still learn a lot from. But I think you do spend a lot of time talking to sort of your nearest neighbors in terms of senior technical roles, even if that technical is spelled slightly differently.
Yeah, I get that. And I think that the data and analytics community is pretty powerful, isn't it? I mean, it isn't. It's not, because I'll talk to people within the industry and they're not part of networks. They haven't been to events. And I always try and encourage them because I think, it can be lonely if you're not sharing those challenges or opportunity. So have you always put yourself out there in terms of networking?
I was terrified of it when I first started. I joined this graduate scheme and they give you all these, they literally sent you on like training courses, 1-day training courses. Turns out it's just talking to people.
Yeah.
It turns out
and they feel the same. They're also petrified of being there by themselves.
Just be genuinely interested in someone and see what you can learn from this conversation. And why wouldn't you want to do that?
Yeah. So is that advice you would give to someone starting?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I mean, like I said, I can see why. I think my method was, when I first went to network events, was just spot someone else by themselves. Like going up to a group would be intimidating, but you're like, are you by yourself as well? Can you be my friend? It's like going back to school, isn't it? But you've got to push yourself out of your comfort zone.
Stand by the food. That's always a safe bet.
Yeah.
You can always talk about that.
Well, everyone likes that. You know, that is something that's quite definitive. So we're going to move on to the quick fire data lightning round.
Okay.
What is a myth in data that you'd like to debunk?
A myth in data that I'd like to debunk? That it's a niche role. It's definitely not. It affects, especially if you have a tech business, absolutely everything that you do.
Yeah, absolutely. Number 2, name a book, event or podcast that you think every data enthusiast should explore.
I think every data enthusiast should read Tufte's books on how to visualize data.
Yeah, okay.
Which is basically visual storytelling.
3, finish the sentence. Data is the key to
value.
It is. And this is a big topic as well, isn't it, at the moment? But yeah, value, absolutely. 4, what is one piece of advice you'd give to someone just starting their career in data? It doesn't have to be one word, by the way.
One piece of advice. Be genuinely interested in how the business works and how the business makes money.
Yeah, I think that is interesting, because I think then there's more purpose behind what you're doing. It's not just a day job then, you're understanding the impact. Did you start your career in that way?
No. I think most advice that you get from people is what they wish they'd been told when they needed to hear it.
Of course it is.
So I think, thinking about the so what? Why does this matter? Why does anybody care? More pragmatically, is what I'm doing on a day-to-day basis aligned to the company's strategic priorities? Is it going to make a difference? That's how you add value.
Do you remember when you realised that? Is it something you were told, or is it something you were learnt yourself?
It was a combination. I mean, I can think back to I'm having traumatic flashbacks. Actually, in physics during my PhD, I had to give a presentation at a meeting, and I gave this really detailed presentation about like which scripts I had run and what code that I did, and people were like, "Yeah, but why? What did you do and why? Like, I don't care about that level of detail. How did this help us achieve our goal?" And I try to think about that in every presentation, every conversation now. Why does anyone care? Yeah.
And that's the thing, I must say, you can be very proud of your own work, and that's justified. You've put a lot of time and effort into it, but it's like, does anyone really care, unless you're not explaining to them why and the value and the how. And last one, name a data buzzword that you love to hate.
I'm going to pick agentic.
Oh.
I'm real tired of agentic AI. I think it's been overhyped and understood.
I don't understand it. Explain to me what that is.
Well, it should mean AI that doesn't just give you an answer, but can go off and do some stuff for you. So it can go and, book a table for you at a restaurant or something like that. But I think you will have some people overhyping it and selling it that it'll just automate your life for you. So agentic AI is, basically AI that can not just respond to you, but can go off and do some stuff for you. And I think people have misunderstood the best uses for it.
Yeah, overhyped. And I like the fact you said you were tired. Tired of the buzzword. Well, thank you. That's the end.
Oh, thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome.